the mountain of no excuses is like there's no summit, there's no end, and there are kind of always excuses, but those excuses are opportunities that we could go and use to be able to go and do something differently.
Man of Mastery, episode 33 with Kyle Maynard. Welcome back to the show where we are exploring actionable ways to restructure our mindset and compound common actions into remarkable results. The mission here is to learn from the success and failures of men and women applying this concept of mastery and its lifelong journey to many different areas of life. Today I have the gift of speaking to a remarkable young man. Kyle Maynard is a record-setting mountaineer, weightlifter, and martial artist. He's traveled the world. He's an ambassador for multiple nonprofits. He's a best-selling author, entrepreneur, recipient of numerous awards, speaker to Fortune 500 companies, and recently to the United Nations. Not bad, right? But how about doing it all before the age of 35 and having been born as a congenital quad-amputee? Kyle said to me, there are always excuses, but those excuses are opportunities that we can use to be able to do something differently. Kyle's done some remarkable things physically, but this chat went way beyond his physical accomplishments. He shared how his parents really enabled him for life, how repeated failures became a foundation for success, and he shares a few of his favorite mindset tricks and mantras. But beyond that, Kyle takes us into a deeper discussion on the future of society and humanity and why getting uncomfortable should include the comfort zones of our belief systems. Three of the actionable and really cool things I took away from this conversation with Kyle. One is that concept of failure as a foundation. He talks about his youth career as a young man wrestling and how his first season he lost every single match. He piled up something like 35 or 36 losses in a row. And imagine, you're doing this with the frustration of not only losing, but as a kid with basically no arms and no legs trying to figure it out and just keeping at that and the mindset that his dad instilled to keep him going to the point where in his second season he started to win and over the course of his wrestling career became a champion. The second thing, which comes or originates from Kyle's mountain climbing expeditions, is his concept of the next 3 feet, just focusing on those next 3 feet. And not only that, but how he ports that into everyday life. What am I going to do in the next 3 hours that can make a difference? Which I really like. And it's similar to something I try to remember each day is the question of what can I do to really move the ball today? One thing that can really be impactful or support the overall mission. And 3, as we got into more of this sort of deeper discussion, was Kyle's really his consciousness and the frequency with which we think about how our lives may touch or affect each other. And we never really know, but it is something to really maybe keep in mind, consider, or think about. That being said, I'm really excited to share this one. So let's just jump right in with Kyle Maynard. Guys, today I am really honored and super excited to have on my show Kyle. So I'm just going to introduce Kyle by his first name for just a minute because in a lot of ways I feel like Kyle is your average everyday next door guy. He and I were chatting offline. I almost feel like it's weird that we've never met before in person, given that we've lived in a couple cities in common at the same time in the past. But in reality, I don't know if this guy is anything even close to average, unless you run in a set of superheroes. There may be one guy I've had on the past that's harder to introduce, but here we go. So Kyle is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, MMA and jiu-jitsu fighter. He's an ESPY award winner, climbed to the summit of a couple of the highest peaks in the world, high school wrestling champ, CrossFit instructor, record-setting weightlifter. He's been on Oprah, Real Sports, CBS, Good Morning America, SportsCenter, CNN, Larry King Live, 2020, and he runs in a set of billionaires and authors. So I'm completely humbled to welcome Kyle Maynard to the show. Kyle, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. I hope to live up to the hype.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I kind of only half joke about the superhero thing because you do have maybe a superpower, something that you have called the best thing that has ever happened to you in life as you look back upon it. And so we'll jump right in and introduce the physical side of your story that underlies all of these amazing accomplishments that are exceptional by any standards. But I want to jump into that so people understand it. But at the same time, I've come to understand that you've got so much to offer on the sort of cerebral intellectual front. I know you're a very existential sort of guy, and I think you and I both really appreciate reading and learning and sharing. So let's just jump right into it. I'll set it up and let's see where we want to go with it. So
Okay.
you were born with what I believe is called a congenital as a congenital amputee. So your arms and your legs didn't develop in the womb past your elbow and your knee joints. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. It's something that there's still not really a known cause for it. Um, the probably the most accurate thing that I came across was when somebody wrote an article for me that was in Men's Journal or was about me and talked about amniotic banding, where the amniotic womb can wrap around the end of a limb and keep it from developing. So that can happen in a finger or a toe. But in my case, it was all four limbs kind of symmetrically affected. So I have 2 feet, but arms that end at the elbows.
A little hard probably for most people to picture if they haven't seen you or met you in person, but it just makes some of the things that you have done out there in the world even more exceptional. So let's maybe talk about some of your sports endeavors. You were a high school wrestling champion ultimately, and I had mentioned your name to a buddy recently. His son is probably 11, 12, talking sixth grade or so, and spent his first season in wrestling in a very, very frustrating manner. I think losing a lot of matches. And this is something you've got some experience with, and I think it fits perfect with the theme here about resilience and using failure as a vehicle for success. So, can you talk a bit about your wrestling past growing up, and then maybe your MMA and jujitsu as an adult?
Sure. I started out wrestling. My dad was my hero and wanted to grow up and basically he was a wrestler and so wanted to be like him and also huge fan of like Hulk Hogan and all those guys jumping off the top ropes, and I figured that's what I was signing up for. So when I came into the room, it was a very different experience, and quickly realized that this sport was going to be difficult to figure out. Just being able to reach out and grab a hold of other people's legs was difficult. And just mimicking any of the moves that other people were doing was a challenge. So I lost every match my first year and hated it. Did not want to come back and do it again. My dad basically tricks me into coming back out and says that like he didn't win a match his whole first year. He said very few people ever win a match their first year, but everybody who signs up their second year will win a match. And because you'll find somebody who it's their first year, so you'll beat them. And off of that was what that kind of allowed me to have the confidence to sign up my second season. And sure enough, like halfway through that season, I beat a first year wrestler. Talk about like kind of like the power of suggestion. And he'd kind of planted that seed inside of me that I'd be able to beat that first year wrestler. And sure enough, I did. And then kept winning a bunch after that. Um, Ended up making it to states by the time I was in eighth grade and wrestled in high school, was on junior varsity until my junior year, got a couple of varsity matches, but it was on one of the top teams in the Southeast. So it's a pretty competitive lineup, and finally broke through on my senior year and had the varsity spot to myself and ended up winning 36 varsity matches that year. Got to go to the nationals and was a match away from being a high school All-American. So that led into jiu-jitsu and, MMA and a whole bunch of other adventures, but really was the kind of foundation for so many things, was that like just repeated failure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think and we'll talk at some point here towards the end before we wrap up on where people can find you and learn more. But there had been a blog section of your website that looks like it's down now. But you had written a super touching and kind of amazing little blog post about sort of from your dad's perspective or your family's perspective when you were born, and they're finding out that they had a physically very special child on their hands, and I think you've said that as a young boy, as everybody could imagine, third person, something very frustrating, and that you prayed every day to have arms and legs, but that your parents and your dad in particular never treated you that way. I think you've called it self-efficacy, or maybe it's cognitive bias, that you look for what you are familiar with looking for. So whether you're looking to succeed or you're looking to fail, that is where your focus is drawn. And your dad, maybe in kind of that great spirit of white lies as a parent, convinced you this is normal, dude. Everybody loses every match their first year, and when you come in as a second year, you're going to kill those first year kids. And somehow that came true for you.
Yeah, it's I think self-efficacy, or like confirmation bias, might be, it's a great way to look at it. Him planting that seed in me caused me to like be able to restructure the way in which I looked at the world. And I think that that's probably the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves or to anyone else, is to like fundamentally restructure the way that we see the world. I think that that's probably a lot of what you do on this podcast, and for the people that are listening, is being able to take a look at our lives and look at it, somehow in a different way. Our brains are kind of uniquely set up to be able to target in on like what we believe to be true. And so with like self-efficacy, that it's just the belief in our capability to be able to do something. If we're in a wrestling match, it's my ability to be able to take you down or not. Like, before that actually happens and occurs, I'm going to have that like thought and that visualization inside of my head of like, is this even possible? We'll size you up. I'll look at you and base it upon like my past experience and, all the other factors that are in there. Like, did I have a huge lunch beforehand? Am I, dehydrated, or how's my training been lately? I think our brains are amazing, and the fact that they can go and scan through a million different things like that super quick, and then just and act. So, I think that the nature of how that operated for my family when I was growing up was really interesting. They for sure could have looked at things and said like, oh shit, like this is not going to work. Um, what do we do now? And instead, they looked at it from the perspective of like, well, this isn't ideal. This isn't what like we were hoping. Him, Kyle being born this way, but yet we'll figure it out. And they, they did, and kind of managed to do that. And I think, and gave me that chance to be able to succeed just by, instead of doing it for me, helping me learn to be able to do it for myself.
Yeah, it's so tough as a parent to figure out, where you find that balance between nurture and kind of push them out of the nest, or challenging any kid. And, especially if there are adaptive or special needs. There's a guy I've had on my show that's become a buddy, Nathan Connolly, who he came out and talked about being born, with spina bifida, and he was never expected to walk. And his dad got him out and was like, no, like, we're going to go climb Half Dome,
Wow.
like there's not going to be any excuses. And I met him by way of a Spartan race. He was cranking up and down the mountain at Squaw Valley in Tahoe in like, winter conditions,
That's awesome.
and leg braces on, and shale and scree, and just kind of no limits. And he's become an avid Spartan racer in the last year or two after being inspired by another lady with spina bifida, Misty Diaz. And so Nathan has said it's his goal to be the first adaptive athlete on the Spartan pro team, but he's not looking to be on the Spartan adaptive pro team, just Spartan pro team, period.
Wow. Wow.
So I love that kind of mindset.
That's really cool. That's powerful.
In terms of this show and mindset and resilience and using hard things to grow, it seems like that is something that people are really thirsting for and need. But
Mm.
as a society, we've gone the other way. Life's gotten easier. We've all gotten softer. You and I both live in San Diego. It gets down below 70 degrees and we're putting on down coats.
Right.
Right. So the things that you've done physically, things like fighting, like climbing mountains, to me, what's super interesting about that, beyond the physical accomplishment, is just the mindset that it takes, the focus. You've talked about looking 3 feet ahead as you bear crawl up a mountain. And I think I love how you bring that back to everyday life. I've heard you say, okay, I'm going to look at my day, and I just need to look 3 hours ahead and figure
Yep.
out how I conquer the next 3 hours of my day. So let me just ask, in terms of, I'll maybe kind of throw you a multi-part question there. What are kind of the dangers or challenges that we're facing as growing, men? I think you're an uncle, I'm a father, in getting, a little soft, or the way we allow kids to be soft these days. Do we need more adventure and rites of passage and things like that? Yeah, how does that set up for you and some of the things you've done, like with MMA and jits in particular?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's for sure a big question, right? Like with technology advancing at the rate at which it is, like what is that future going to go and look like without, the challenges, or even will we get there to that point if we don't face kind of how we are right now? And I'd be lying too if I said that, like, I've by any means like got that figured out for myself. Like there's definitely times where, like you said, I'll just look at this as, what do the next 3 hours look like? What do I need to go and get through and knock out right now to be able to go and make it to that next 3 hours, and kind of approach things from that perspective. But it's our society, I think, is definitely fracturing into two camps, when the strange thing is, like, it seems like the polarity is increasing and the vocalization of that polarity is increasing, yet a ton of conversations I have with people seem to be the opposite. I think people agree upon like way more than they don't. And it seems to be that, like, there's sort of a middle group that doesn't really um care necessarily what, like, you're doing behind closed doors with like your sexuality or personal choices, if you want to use marijuana recreationally, or whatever you want to do there. But at the same time, they understand that, like, the sort of welfare nanny state can be really constricting and debilitating if there's no way out of it. I have friends who, um, just because they got a job and took a little bit of extra income, they lost their health care. Like, that's not okay. And, like, if we're going to disincentivize people from, you know, doing better, then that to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think it's definitely counterintuitive to the idea of, like, that you're talking about with mastery. And I love what you said too. I think it was on your website where, um, with mastery, like, it's a journey of a lifetime with no final destination. but rewarding every day. It's I love that. Like I've always said too, like the mountain of no excuses is like there's no summit, there's no end. And there are kind of always excuses, but those excuses are opportunities that we could go and use to be able to go and do something differently. If we take an honest look at our lives and ourselves and see maybe even in this next 3 feet, this next 3 hours, like what could I do differently?
Yeah, I've heard you mention the sort of the myth of the summit before, and I'm completely with you on that. It seems like your adventures, whether it's whether it's outdoors, mountaineering, a sport, your next endeavor. I mean, you're involved as an ambassador for so many different foundations that you do. My impression from afar is that you get very energized and you tackle sort of that next summit, metaphorically, if you will. And then, I mean, it almost sounds like in between those summits, you kick back and not only recover, but maybe try to refine your motivation, or at least I'll put it in my own terms, is I feel like I have to keep having those big scary goals somewhere out on my calendar to
Right.
keep myself focused and keep myself motivated, or I'm in danger of drifting. And maybe that's where a lot of people are. They're daunted by how to take that first step. And not everybody can be Kyle, and not everybody can be whomever, but that's the wrong comparison. Is we're all individuals, and you got to start where you are, and everybody else has got to meet each other where they are, and take whatever that first step is. It could just be deciding to act. It could be getting off the couch. It could be running 30 miles. Everybody's at a different place. It's just taking those kind of small actions and building them up consistently has amazing results if we allow it to.
Yeah, yeah. I love the idea of like the kind of compound interest effect of things over time. And I think, yeah, to your point of the in between periods of like in between a summit or in between, some big project or goal, to have that kind of period of downtime. I think that allowed like a deeper level of introspection that, I wouldn't have maybe gotten in like a traditional learning environment, which I'm super grateful for now. And I think then the question then becomes like, continually like what to do with that. Like even seeing, cooking on your website, right? Like is a I think it was Sean Butcher that you had on.
Yeah, Sean Boucher. Yep.
Sean Boucher. Yeah, like just like how many different areas can we go and apply that like level of like mastery mindset to? I mean, it's almost not infinite, but there's definitely a lot. There's only so much time that we have in the day to be able to go and figure out what it is that we're doing. I think for me lately, like that like deeper level of like mastery has been like in this sort of like existential philosophical sort of um debate and thinking through existence and like thinking through like what does like a good well arranged kind of outcome for humanity look like down the road in the future. I'd be lying if I said too that doesn't take away a lot from like enjoying the present moment for what it's worth, and probably like the area of mastery that I can go and bring to my life most now is like just gratitude for the present, and just being able to hang out and kind of smile and enjoy more, as opposed to like thinking through like all the different scenarios of like how do we fix the situations that we're in.
Yeah. No, I can completely relate. It's amazing how hard it is just to get it out of our own heads and be happy and enjoy the present without, all the other stuff swirling around sometimes. Well, since you are really interested in sort of the existential right now, I'll take a couple quick tangents. So let's talk about serendipity. I was getting ready for this interview this week, right? And just a day or two ago, so I'll tie it back to Joel Runyon. When I was talking to your buddy Joel of Impossible HQ, we were just
Right.
talking about simplifying in life, and not just sort of the digital detox and digital minimalism sort of concept, but just, I think he put it in really good terms, is like, if you're hoarding resources that could be useful to somebody else, then you're doing a disservice. So I
Mm.
go, you know what? I love books. I love to learn. I love to read physical books. So I've got so many books stacked up around my home office and my house here. And I go, you know what? I'm gonna cull some of this. I'm gonna stack up some books that I know I'm not gonna read again, or maybe I'm not gonna ever get to read, and I'm gonna donate them. I'm gonna
Wow.
go get them to somebody else that could use them. And I got a stack here that are going to Goodwill, and I got a stack on as I'm looking to my right of like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna read these or not. And then I listened to a past interview you did where you talked about what your favorite book is, or at least your favorite at the time. And it's sitting here in this stack of six maybes. And it's suddenly come back into, well, if Kyle
Oh,
Kyle says it's
yeah.
one of his favorite, Empire of the Summer Moon.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay, cool. Awesome. I had a few that popped into my head as to what would have been my favorite. So,
at least on that day, it was your favorite. And so, yeah, somewhat serendipitously, that thing, if I hadn't heard your past podcast a day or two ago, that might have already gone off to Goodwill, but now it's on the.
wow. No, yeah. Strong recommendation for that book. For sure my favorite story in history. And just the adversity, like I think, like, for your listeners to kind of gain some context as to what that's about, like it's basically the Texas Rangers, the Comanche Indian tribes on the plains, the high plains of Texas, like in the around 1830 to 1890 period, where the bulk of the fighting occurred after the Civil War. And talk about like just wild abandon and overcoming adversity. The Comanche tribe were the fiercest of the fierce and toughest of the tough. They would, you know I mean, this is maybe a little graphic, but they would go and like ride like 200 miles, like 300 miles, like ride a horse to death, have a second horse they jump on. They would drink the dead horse's stomach, contents for hydration and continue on. Like they were just like absolutely wild in terms of their ability to be able to go to limits that others couldn't. And the Texas Rangers were kind of like the you know closest Western equivalent to that, right? In terms of just like their hardiness and their ability to be able to like hold their ground. And I think both sides clashing together there at that point was really like one of my favorite periods in history, although it was definitely like a gruesome one at times. I think it just showed like how deeply both, you know, valued and believed in their way of life and were willing to fight for it.
Yeah, there's so much that come out of those sort of warrior cultures, and the toughness, as brutal as it is, that go along with it. It sounds like you've been on a pretty introspective journey lately, or between some of the big adventures, and you've talked about things like authenticity in the past and being willing to just, open tough talking points. So you just ran through two or three quick sort of big societal third rail type of things, but so let me just hit one. Psychedelics. I think you've talked about some of the things that are out there as, maybe in the past taboo, but
Right.
are potentially like real helpful things these days. You and I have a common interest in things like vets with PTS, and I think there's been some real strong research about some things that can help that and other problems.
I think, yeah, I think the psychedelics have for sure like opened my mind in ways in which like I couldn't have probably done that on my own, like and just in my own personal experience. And I've seen them help so many other people too. um on the flip side, I also see like a strong argument for sobriety. I see, I also enjoy wine as well. Like, I think it kind of depends on like the person and like where you're at and like what you're, what you feel, you want to take on. I think with psychedelics in particular, like it can occasionally be like a bit of a Pandora's box, right? Like if you are battling those, inner demons, then you want to be in a place where with like the right set and setting and the right people that you're surrounded by, that you're able to work through that. Otherwise, I've had friends that have had really traumatic experiences from it. So not to deter people away from it, but I think it's something that, go in with like some degree of 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 caution, but also with like hope that like real positive change could go and come out of it. Like I think for sure believe that the decriminalization of these things is an enormous step in the right direction. And the continued kind of therapeutic use of it too, I think is really powerful. The studies that are coming out now with MDMA and veterans, I think is really really promising. Being able to go and help treat things, and that is a pharmaceutical as opposed to like something that came from the earth and also has good efficacy. So I think at one point in my life I was probably just like all in 100% on the psychedelics, and now I would say like just to encourage people to feel it for themselves and like feel what's right for you.
Yeah, that seems like a fair, well-rounded look at it, and maybe just being open-minded that even if it's not something that fits into your needs or your life, that it may benefit others.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to take away the stigma with all those kind of things, right? Like there's so much stigma that we've had attached to all kinds of things. I mean, even like, sexuality, like talking about that, right? Like it's really there's that's kind of I think the shadow of like the Protestant ethic, right? Or however you want to go and put it. I mean, any like fundamentalist view of um of anything, I guess, is really like what like my desire is to go and encourage people to be able to like open themselves up to a range of things that are outside of their comfort zone, right? And open ourselves up to different perspectives and beliefs that like we would have otherwise shied away from or questioned. I think that to me is like traveling around the world and seeing how like other cultures and other things like did things differently than how I did them growing up. It really like opened my eyes to the fact that like, wow, this is the world's a lot. It's a small place, but it's a lot bigger place too than I ever realized in terms of like, you know, right and wrong, good or bad, sort of the ethical conversation.
I spent so I've had a chance here as a little bit older adult to do a good bit of vacation travel internationally, but as a kind of a late 20s adult, I was inspired by a buddy of mine. He ended up being the best man at my wedding, a guy from New Zealand. And growing up in New Zealand, he told me, he goes, hey, look, at that time at least, he's like, we're two main islands in the middle of nowhere. We're like 3 or 4 million people total, Kiwis, and like at least 1 million live abroad. So we're keenly aware that we're really isolated, and that is dangerous in terms of an isolated worldview. And so they had as a culture, they had a view that your education wasn't just what you learned in school, that kids had to get, kind of get pushed out of the nest a little bit and go see some of the world,
Hmm.
whether that was, backpack Europe or go travel around Asia, or just, kind of get out there. And you, as you said, you see so many different things. And every trip I think I've taken, I come home with an appreciation for some new things that maybe I never experienced before, and that I want to make part of my life because I liked and enjoyed. And at the same time, come back with an appreciation of things I had at home that maybe I undervalued or took for granted in the past.
Totally. What's something that like a recent memory that maybe opened your mind up?
Uh, well, so that first big trip I took that he inspired me, I grabbed the backpack and went international for 6 or 7 months. And it's really tough to say, what's a favorite place. There's so many incredible places. And I think a lot of it is a product of who you meet,
Right.
kind of the people along the way in the journey. So I would say, back in those days, the mountains of Nepal and Nepal in general was one of my favorite places. But one of my more recent trips with my family these days, and this kind of goes back to the people, is we took my wife and I took our son to Europe a couple years ago, and we met an Australian family that was traveling with a couple kids, a boy about the same age as my son, and they were off on a full year long adventure. It took their kids out of school. They were homeschooled.
Wow.
They went all over the world, using that as like a real world education for their kids. And so we hung out for the 2-3 weeks of the Europe tour, but to the point of like, it's kind of who you meet along the way. Became friends. They came and visited us on their US leg of their journey. We've gone over to see them in Australia and see their home now, and then they came back and spent Christmas in Mexico with us last year. So it's
Oh, wow.
those, lasting bonds that you never expected but you found along the road.
Yep. That for sure. I definitely can relate, and I'm super grateful for that. I think it's kind of just wild, like the totality of the amount of travel I've gotten to go and do over the last few years. I think sometimes like I'd harbor guilt that like I haven't gotten to go and stay in touch with everybody, so as much as I've wanted to. But um, it's like when you come across somebody that you haven't seen in a really long time, I think it's just like and especially when you can go and catch it back up, like it's no time has passed at all. I think that's a really special thing.
Yeah, it sure is. It's really powerful, and those kind of friends where that can happen, it's really nice. So another guy, I'll segue to some folks I met through some recent travels. There's a guy named Laval Saint Germain who has done some amazing things. He's quite a mountaineer himself. He's done the seven summits and more. I think he's done the highest peak in a number of countries.
Hmm.
And recently, he solo rode the Atlantic Ocean from continent to continent in, I think it was 52 days. He did that, I'm not going to say on a whim, but he was inspired by a friend who had a sudden cancer diagnosis.
Wow.
And he did the row as sort of, maybe in solidarity, maybe as a bit of a metaphor of, suddenly, you're afloat on a very scary and risky and unknown journey. And ultimately, you're all by yourself. So, despite all those things he's done, and by the way, he's an airline pilot, right? So, by day, flies planes around Canada and adventures the world. And we talked about imposter syndrome. So he said, like, despite all that, when he gets in a room to do public speaking, he looks around and he goes, like, what am I doing with Joe DeSena and Patrick Sweeney and Kyle Maynard? Like, I don't belong here.
Right. Right.
Do you ever feel that way?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think I think even in preparation for this conversation too, and thinking about like, wow, there's a lot of areas to be desired in terms of like how I can approach my life with greater degree of mastery, and then like the imposter syndrome there that occurs with like um you know just even having that conversation, or thinking that through, right? Like uh I think it's absolutely something that most people face. If they don't face it, there's probably also two questions that they aren't asking themselves that maybe they would benefit from, is my view. I think that
Mm.
it's like anything, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like it can be something that can sink the ship if the imposter syndrome runs the show. But if we the lack of imposter syndrome can basically turn to just like self-aggrandizing narcissism, right? So I think there is kind of a healthy balance there. Like maybe there's, I guess the healthy expression um, of that would be humility.
I like that.
So I think, but yeah, it totally can. uh, I mean, put myself in the shoes of your friend there, 52 days, crossing an ocean, and how terrifying that must be in moments, and also like really peaceful and beautiful and serene and tranquil in moments too. Like I'm sure it was probably probably a bit of both.
I'm sure it was the full spectrum. I mean, you mentioned fear a bit. what are some of your fears, or what do you think holds you back?
Probably more than anything, this might sound a little crazy, but it's, I think, fear of, looking out in the future or being down the road and when looking back and wishing that I would have done something different. So I think it's like the fear of like future regret.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um, just thinking about how, interconnected everything is, right? The time that we take to have this conversation, and then like who all is listening to this, and the different routes that could go. If you imagine kind of the universe as just like a series of a ton of different strings, of possibilities of roads that we could go and take, then um, yeah, I think just getting to the point where I would be far enough down one of those paths and then look back and say, like, yeah, I wish I would have done X. I wish I would have done Y. I wish I would have done Z. Just like that fear of regret. But then in this present moment now, like, that's all that I have. It's all that you have. It's all that we have, right? And time will just keep moving on regardless. And it's kind of indifferent to those feelings. So it's a matter of like, how can I go and take the lessons and the experiences and all those things that I've learned, apply them to my life right now, and be a little bit better, 0.0001% better than I was 3 hours ago.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Again, I guess, goes back to those compounding results. Something you said in a past interview that really stuck with me is I think you mentioned something along the lines of, you're part of what you do is you're a public speaker, you're a motivational speaker, and that oftentimes people speak not necessarily about what the audience needs, but what they as a speaker personally need. And that, that becomes a theme. But done right, hopefully what you're going to do is you're going to touch a few other people, and maybe they can touch a few other people. And you never quite know when or where you're going to be able to impact somebody else.
For sure. Yeah. And then, I think it's an interesting thing. I think we're all kind of on our own journeys, meant to kind of have, our own different unique discoveries. And that's a big question of like the future path that I take. It's like the debate that I have with myself is like, do I take the path that I believe to be the best for myself, and, kind of screw everybody else, right? And like just best for Kyle? Or do I take the path that's, going to go and do, the greatest amount of good? And I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. Um, However, when we think about it though, maybe it's not, maybe sometimes taking the path that like is best for us will ultimately go and do the greatest amount of good. I think Alan Watts said, it's um, it's the fact that everyone is trying to like save the world that causes it to like need to be saved.
Hmm. Yeah.
So if everyone were to just stop trying to save the world, then like maybe the world would just be okay, and it would figure itself out. I don't know that to be true, right? Like this is again kind of like those different like realities that go and open up of like, do you zig when you should have zagged, or or zag when you should have zigged?
Yeah, no, there's so many things we do that have unintended consequences. Certainly, a lot of times from a policy perspective, on a grander scale. If I steal a couple other quotes that you have quoted from authors in the past, follow your bliss certainly seems to speak to maybe taking care of ourselves first and capitalizing on what we can bring to ourselves and the world and the people around us. And maybe in the spirit of growth through adversity and doing hard things, I think you've quoted another that's along the lines of we either choose the things we suffer or they'll be chosen for us.
Right, right. Or maybe a bit of both, right? Like it's um the follow your bliss is interesting. I heard, I'm sure you're probably pretty familiar with Dr. Jordan Peterson. I remember hearing him rip that to shreds one time. which is weird because Joseph Campbell, who came up with the sort of hero's journey concept, is really closely related to a lot of what Dr. Peterson talks about. And I'm a huge fan of Dr. Peterson. I went and sat outside of when he presented here in San Diego and like waited an hour and a half with my sister in the cold just to be able to shake his hand and tell him thank you. It had a
Wow.
huge impact on me. But also the to hear him kind of rip apart like the follow your bliss um, message was interesting. His whole thing is like you need to shoulder responsibility, and bliss is kind of like the denial of that responsibility, right? Like if we just choose the kind of the blissful path, then we're missing out on like the thing in which we're supposed to like do to perform and to work. But yet then again, maybe like choosing that blissful path is the thing that we're supposed to do, and inspiring enough other people to go and do that would eventually result in a good conceivable outcome, well, not just for ourselves but for others as well.
Yeah, or maybe if I throw another angle yet on the pile is maybe it is our perception or definition of bliss. If bliss means taking the easy way out and avoiding conflict and avoiding hard things and kind of idling along through life, then maybe I tend to agree with Dr. Peterson. But if we change that mindset to, I'm going to embrace hard things. I'm going to do things that are challenging. I'm going to do things that may be hard now, but I think they've got payback down the road.
Yep.
I can't go for instant gratification. I can't always say yes to my son having ice cream, right? Because the
Right.
long-term effects are bad.
Right.
To pick a simple example. So if we think about bliss as, I don't know, maybe finding fulfillment in doing things that are tough and challenging in the ways that helps us grow, then maybe it can be follow your bliss.
Yeah, I guess it's true. It does entirely depend upon like what your like perception and perspective of that bliss would actually be.
How are you doing on time? Do you have a hard cutoff?
No, I'm good. I
Okay.
have a DMV afternoon, I think is my plan after this. So anything to procrastinate on that would be great.
I'm not sure I embrace doing hard things when it comes to the
The
DMV.
DMV, right?
Yeah, so I'm
I will
trying not to take too.
follow my bliss to a
Yeah,
good DMV experience.
well, I'll try not to take too much more of your time, but I think just talking about some hard things, and I want to hit a couple other points that I, there will be a lot of people who can't imagine climbing a 19,000-foot mountain. But there are a lot of people who, one of the examples you've used is, using a touchscreen on a smartphone. A lot of people know how to do that and they can't imagine how you do it. And you're just like, well, I just do, right? I learned
Right.
how, but I can't remember who this was. This was quite a while ago. And I want to say it was a buddy of yours that I saw, or maybe you told the story that this buddy of yours being absolutely terrified at riding in a vehicle that you were driving
Right. Right.
while using a cell phone at the same
Right.
time.
Right.
And that's probably a shoulder shrug for you too. Yeah, like everybody else does it. Why can't I do it?
Yep. No, that definitely. So it was a friend of mine that had summited um Everest, right? So he's been in like some of the scariest environments on Earth, if not the scariest environment on Earth. And yeah, he told me that one of the scariest moments of his life was when he was driving with me for the first time, and I answered my cell phone while I was driving. Like, if he told me like years later down the road, it's just kind of funny how he just completely played it cool in the moment, but was absolutely terrified. So
That's hilarious. What else I want to ask you? These are pretty random and unconnected, but you mentioned, and you might have done this for one of your charity endeavors, but you mentioned doing the walk across Greece. Did you do that with Mark Devine, the Courage Foundation, or on your own?
no, it was with a few other SEAL buddies. But we were able to raise some funds for the Navy SEAL Foundation and for the Glenn Doherty Foundation. And just,
Okay.
being there in Greece and getting to kind of go and experience that and like retrace the steps of Spartans was absolutely wild. And the Greek countryside too is just breathtakingly beautiful. And to think about that too, like kind of coming back to our earlier conversation of like, the different routes and paths that we take, right? Like had they not done that, and stood up to the tyrants, who were, beating down the gates, then certainly it would have been a different world. Conceivably, I guess, in a way, like Xerxes, like probably could have just rolled over through the rest of Europe at that point. So, it's kind of wild to think, like, what would the world look like today had that occurred?
Yeah, absolutely. You never know. And they probably didn't even have that thought, right? It's just like, this is what we believe is the right thing to do. This is what we stand for.
Yep. It's almost better, I think, to potentially probably not have that thought, right? And just to be able to act. I think when sometimes for me, I think I do get like into that like overthinking existence kind of aspect of things, which um can be a bit paralyzing without like a true north. But like I think that like diving deeper into examining those things, I think is really, I think it's important. I envy people who maybe don't do that, right? Who have sort of that very clear, like, this is the way and the only way. But um then again, I don't too. So it's kind of kind of both sides, right? Like then again,
Right.
I try to encourage people to be more open-minded about things. So, but yeah, I appreciate you kind of indulging the, overthinking existence conversation with me.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to me too. I have a little bit of a danger tendency towards analysis paralysis and too much thinking and not enough action. So, you go back to speakers speaking about what they need to talk about, this mastery journey and challenge and learning and application. It starts with me, far from mastered it, and certainly what I need, and have a sense that others can benefit, and I hope that serves. But
What is, if you don't mind me asking
yeah.
you this, then like what is the thing like when you are at a crossroads in your life that you use to judge whether you zig or zag?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think what has really been foremost in my mind as I've made those kind of decisions, particularly over the last year or two, which is when I've really like packaged together, what you people are hearing now, and I've started to write about and things like that. So one of the things for me, and I don't know if you have trouble with this as well, is I think there's value in time and silence, but I have a tendency for my mind to run wild. So a challenge for me has been to, through tools, things like meditation, breathing, to get the mind to quiet down and do a little more, less than conscious thinking,
Mm.
and start to get some clarity on things. And some of the things that maybe a lot of us think about piecemeal or in fleeting moments, I've tried to sit and spend some time really articulating and putting on paper for myself those last year or two, in particular. What are the things that drive me, and what are the principles? You mentioned true north. I don't know that it's true north as a direction, but what are some of the things that are really fundamental values for me that I want to try to uphold in whatever I'm doing? Application big or small, zig or zag type of decisions. And it's amazing how, if you want to call that a personal ethos or whatever it might be, when you take the time to get some of those fundamentals that have probably been rattling around your head for a while, and
Yep.
kind of get them down on paper, and you can refer back to as a bit of a compass. They really seem to really inform almost everything.
Wow. Do you have a suggestion on like the best way to elicit those values? Just sit in silence for a while and kind of like feel that through.
I'll give all the credit to our mutual friend Mark Devine on that one. So the way I found Mark was I had a basically like a breathing panic attack on an airplane 4 years ago.
Wow.
I've flown and traveled for work, not as a consultant all over the country, North America. I've traveled all over the world for fun and never had an issue flying. Been doing it since I was a kid. And then one day, they closed the door, getting ready to take off, and I had this attack, and I was that guy where I had to stand up and be like, "Hey, open the door, I'm getting off." And I had no idea why. I had no idea what to do about it. And I don't know what I Googled, but somehow I came across Mark and his organization, a lot of things they teach around breathing. And as I got further into it, He's just got some really incredible tools that help coach people through that sort of personal ethos process of articulating what he calls the three P's, the passions, the principles, and then ultimately, at least at point in time or in some encompassing way, trying to articulate what you think your unique purpose is
Mm.
to the world. So yeah, you might check back in with him, or I've mentioned some people that I'm going through becoming a certified coach in that process and his operating system now as well. So be happy to help you if I can or point you in the right direction.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, even just that insight, I appreciate greatly, and thank you for sharing that story too. You know, like I said, I think earlier, I loved when I read on your website where you said like mastery is the journey of a lifetime with no final destination, but rewarding every day. Like that really resonated with me, and I can sense now, even to a greater degree, I think like why that was the case, and I think having been through what you've been through, and to come out the other side of it, and to have the life that you have now, that's pretty cool. That's pretty remarkable.
I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you saying that. Coming from a guy who's accomplished and overcome so much as you have, that means a lot, Kyle. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, brother. Thank you.
I don't want to take too much of your day here. I know you got some exciting stuff to do this afternoon,
All right.
but maybe in the spirit of that last thought from you, and I mentioned Nepal was one of my favorite journeys when I was doing the Annapurna circuit, like a 2-week trek. It's kind of like for hikers, it's a path, but for locals, it's their road. They're moving stuff between villages,
Mm,
and every person you pass says namaste.
mm,
And I've heard you mention, what that means is, the light inside of me sees the light or recognizes the light inside of you. So, I really appreciate you taking some time to read some of what I've written and spend time with me today in the audience, and listen and share, and in that spirit of all trying to see the light in each other where we resonate with each other, or maybe even more importantly, where we don't see eye to eye and we can still appreciate our commonalities.
absolutely, man. Thank you for saying that, and for recognizing that. I think that's probably, you know, perhaps at the end of the day, like the greatest thing is like, even if we don't see eye to eye with someone, to be able to like to recognize that light inside of them, universally, I think is really. I, I'm a firm believer that like somehow in some way, like the life force that's running inside of me and running inside of you is also running inside of my sister's puppy that I'm sitting next to right now, and like um just the little shifts that we can go and do to help that. Like, I mean, it's also like, that's like perhaps like a super simplistic explanation of it, right? Like, I don't think any of us have any idea, like, the reality in life that we're in, like what that actually is. But I think it starts with each of us just taking the time to be able to appreciate that light in somebody else's eyes. And at least if we don't see eye to eye, right, then we can be slightly less pissed off than we were before. And I will take that to the bank or to the DMV any day.
Right. Well, yeah, really, really well said. Well, so for people, Kyle, that want to maybe stay tuned in to what your next big adventure, literally or figuratively, might be, learn more about you. I think you have a best-selling book where you talk more about the wrestling past and some other challenges. I know you've got a website I'll put a link to, Kyle Maynard,
Yep.
kyle-maynard.com. What else is upcoming or you want to let people know about, including I know you've got an involvement in some apparel and supplements companies as well?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have some buddies that are leading the charge with that. I've got some things in the works currently, that have yet to like announce or unveil yet. But I think if people are on my site or YouTube or Instagram, can follow and see what happens next. but I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be like, I'm a firm believer that like just the new chapters that go and open up in our lives, allow us to be able to go just deeper to a different place than we've ever been before. And that like, I think the universe itself is somehow sort of like, ripples and layers and expressions of love. And even if we have to fight through tough times or dark times to be able to go and get to that point, then, there is like always that light at the end of the tunnel. I think that your story is like definitely evidence of that too. And um, inspires me. I think that probably more than anything else, like having a family down the road is, something that excites me. Just like being able to see life through my kids' eyes someday. As well as, I mean, now I get to do that through my nieces and nephew over Christmas. So that'll be fun. But yeah, I think grateful for you, grateful for this conversation, just kind of helping me, be able to hit that alignment for the rest of my day. And, I'm a big believer that we never really know kind of what that next thing around the corner too, that will open us up to, a whole new world would be. And I didn't know where this conversation would go, but I'm really grateful for how it's unfolded. And, definitely, we should go talk Joel into doing some kind of adventure down the road. And except I think he's probably significantly more extreme than either of us is.
No
I've
doubt.
not seen him in a bit, but he's one of the craziest bastards I've ever come across in my life. And seeing him like running across Antarctica is like absolutely insane.
Yeah, he sets the bar high, but I just love the whole concept that, it's only impossible until you've done it. Your gratitude means a lot, and I super appreciate your time, Kyle, and your willingness to share, and being kind of a deep thinker and being willing to talk about some stuff that's probably not on your normal talking points. Just your humility, and again, I'm so grateful for you coming by to talk today. One thing I'll make sure to get links up to where people can tune in and find out what might be going on next. Certainly, family is one of the biggest, greatest adventures of all when you head down that path. But I of all the things I wrote down, I want to make sure I mention one more that maybe people can take away. One thing I often talk to my son about is having a mantra you can come back to when things
Mm.
get tough. Or I've said a little bit differently to him. I said that your brain can't hold pain and music in the same thought. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
when you're pushing during that Spartan race or during a soccer game, and things are painful physically or challenging emotionally or mentally, maybe you come back to a song, or maybe a little simple repetitive mantra can do the same thing. And you've quoted a buddy of yours that I think was taken by a brain tumor, and used it yourself, I think, in some of your mountain climbs. Not dead, can't quit.
That one, yeah, it's amazing. I think it's something that continually kind of realized like the deeper truth in that, like we only have so much time, and like, that as long as we have the air inside of our lungs and blood inside of our heart to continue pumping, then we can continue to go and find a way to to move forward. There was one that I was going to share when you said mantra that just came up, and I forget the Sanskrit way to say this, but it's one that has really been stuck with me recently. It's all, may all beings be happy, healthy, and free. And
Nice.
I think that one is I think it really like touches to the point where you said like you can't, was it you said that you can't have music and
And pain.
pain at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. Well, that's an amazing way to wrap up. Thanks for sharing that one as well, Kyle, and your time. I hope we keep in touch and can hear more about your adventures to come. I will. I've thrown some ideas at Joel, and I'll throw them your way as well. Maybe we can all hook up and do something.
Okay. Sounds good, man. Don't threaten me with a good time.
All right. Thanks so much, Kyle.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today and joining me on that one. And thank you again to Kyle. He's an incredible young man and a lot of fun to talk to. The links to where you can find Kyle and follow him and his next adventure, I'll put all that up with the show notes for this episode on the website, manofmastery.com/033. So this is episode 33, manofmastery.com/033. Again, I really appreciate your time and appreciate the continued support. Thank you so much. One of the things you can really, really do to help, if you like the show, if you enjoyed Kyle, if you like the content, you like where this is going, go up to iTunes, to Apple Podcasts, and give us a rating, and preferably even take a minute to write a short review. Even if you don't normally consume your podcasts on Apple, that's still the biggest platform out there. And taking a few minutes to do that really helps with that platform to promote the search engines, everything around podcasting to help spread the word and get this out there to others. And then on social media, Instagram, at The Man of Mastery, you can follow along there to make sure you stay in tune to what's coming up, new episodes, guests in the pipeline, when those new episodes drop. And furthermore, same ID, at The Man of Mastery on Facebook. You'll find from there a Man of Mastery closed group. And if you want to take that next step, that's for men looking to go a little bit deeper, learn from and motivate each other, set scary goals, face our fears, take action, and grow. Look forward to seeing you over there. Thank you again for your time this week. Look forward to sharing another incredible guest with you next week.